A long time ago, in a massive tech corporation, there was this guy, let's call him Eric, who had a grudge. He set up a timer that would delete a ton of important files, just in case he ever got fired. Every so often, he reset the trigger, keeping his little revenge plan on standby. But fate has a twisted sense of humor. Before he could get fired, his own timer went off while he was still employed. No severance, no farewell party, just an unceremonious boot out the door. When I was a kid, I figured out that if I threw up at school, the teachers would call my mom to come get me. One day, in second grade, I faked being sick because I wanted to go home early. What my dumb little brain forgot. That was the day of our field trip to the zoo. The second I realized, I tried to convince my teacher I was fine, but my mom was already on her way. In elementary school, my bus picked me up around 11 a.m., and school started at noon. One morning, I didn't feel like going, so I told my mom my stomach hurt. I watched the bus pull up in front of the house, then drive off. The second it was out of sight, I jumped on the couch, cheering. My mom lost her shit. She was so mad she drove me to school herself, lecturing me the whole way about wasting gas money when she could barely afford it. I used to work in a government office, and we had a donation box in one of the visitor centers. One morning, the box was empty. On top of that, money disappeared from the snack room, where people paid on an honor system. A couple of days later, cash went missing from another office. Our internal security started investigating, questioning everyone who had access to both locations. Only one person had keys to both, the donation box and the second office. He worked at one and lived in employee housing near the other. Security checked the cameras, and guess what? His body type matched the guy on tape. He'd been trying to build a career but constantly whined about his salary. In the end, he threw it all away for $100 in small bills. I worked with a small-town police department, maybe 10 officers total. One of them got caught using the city's gas station to fill up his personal car. The chief and his captain set up a stakeout, waiting in the bushes. Sure enough, one night, the guy rolled up and started pumping gas. They jumped out, caught him red-handed. He lost his job, his family's health insurance, and a lifetime pension, all for stealing $30 worth of gas every couple of weeks. My friend's sister was engaged to a great guy. His only flaw? He thought wearing a seatbelt was uncool. He crashed his car and died. A few weeks later, she found out she was pregnant. Now she's a single mom. So, yeah, skipping the seatbelt wrecked at least 3 lives. My high school driving instructor told us about a kid who refused to use turn signals because turn signals are for losers. The instructor told the kid's dad, thinking he'd set him straight. Instead, the dad agreed with him. It's been 25 years, and I still can't get over that. One time, the cops came to my buddy's house and told him they didn't need a statement. He insisted on telling his side of the story anyway. Ended up in jail. Back in high school, my friend Eddie was a baseball prodigy. Full-ride scholarship to college. A week before graduation, we were playing basketball in gym class. He missed a shot, got pissed, punched a wall, broke his hand. The university pulled his scholarship because he couldn't attend summer training. The guy was devastated. More than a decade later, he still tells everyone he could have gone pro. Now, he works as a crane operator in Philly, making good money, but man, he really screwed himself over. I know a guy who can't hold a job to save his life. The second he feels incompetent, he picks fights with coworkers, gets fired before his probation is up. Now he's been unemployed for almost a year, and no one will hire him because his resume is just a graveyard of 6-month stints. I've got a relative just like him, always making up problems that don't exist. His wife constantly tells him to chill out, but he never listens. Over the years, he's burned every opportunity that came his way. At one point, his boss was going to pay off his house if he stayed with the company. He threw that away. The guy was making over 10 grand a month, half on the books, half in cash. Blew it. They were going to promote him to warehouse manager. Blew that too. Now, as he approaches 70, he's finally realizing he spent a lifetime screwing himself over. Every step of the way, someone tried to talk sense into him. He just never listened. We had an employee at another branch who was flipping company merch on his social media for 10 times the retail price. The company found out and fired him the next day. Ironically, right after he got canned, the company announced a network-wide salary increase. So, he lost his job and a raise over a measly $100 in merch resales. One of the dumbest ways to wreck your own life I've ever seen. I know a guy who convinced himself the world was out to get him. He was a war veteran and used that as a shield any time he felt disrespected. Any minor slight, real or imagined, was met with a lecture about his veteran status and demands for special treatment. He drove away everyone who tried to help him, spiraled deeper and deeper, snapping at anyone who could have actually thrown him a lifeline. In the end, he lost his career, his family, everything. We worked together, and I'll never forget our last meeting. We were all brainstorming ways to help him, the room full of genuine concern. Then he stormed in, screamed at everyone, and we just sat there, speechless. He became his own worst enemy. Now, apparently, he sells vacuum cleaners. Here's how it all unraveled. He was assigned a company car. It had some mechanical issues, which he reported. The vehicle was scheduled for repairs. He kept reporting the same issue every day, doing everything by the book. But before the repair date arrived, the car finally gave out. Instead of realizing this was just bad luck, he became convinced he was going to be blamed and docked for the cost of repairs, even though there was zero chance of that happening. He had done everything right, documented it all. But in his mind, he was already the victim of some massive conspiracy. So he snapped, verbally attacked and physically threatened the guy in charge of maintenance scheduling. Accused the company of sabotage. The guy he attacked didn't even press charges, but there were too many witnesses, and security cameras caught the whole meltdown. And instead of calming down, he escalated. He somehow got the company president's number and called him directly to unload his frustrations. That was the end of his career. I once worked with a guy in a union job who decided he didn't need the union. Said it was morally wrong. We tried explaining all the benefits he was taking for granted, but he didn't want to hear it. Then one day, there was an incident, and he got called into a disciplinary meeting. He actively argued against the union rep who was there to help him, demanded to sign a waiver opting out of representation, thinking he was finally free. A few hours later, they fired him. Just like that. Free health care, tuition assistance, guaranteed vacation time, paid sick leave, housing and legal support, locked-in salary raises. He threw it all away over some ideological nonsense. Back in college, my friend wanted to show off at a party with his fire-breathing skills. Problem was, he grabbed a bottle of medical alcohol instead of regular fire fluid. Took a big swig, went to spit it into the flame, but the fire was too close to his face. Lost his eyebrows and spent the night in the ER. Next day, he found out someone recorded the whole thing, and it went viral on campus. A painful but memorable lesson in thinking before you try to impress people. That reminded me of another incident. A friend of mine dated an absolute idiot. When this guy turned 21, he and his equally stupid friends decided to celebrate in his parents' garage. Since they were adults now, they drank themselves silly and, at some point, got the genius idea to light their farts on fire. They took turns, one by one, laughing their asses off. Then it was the birthday boy's turn. He laid on the filthy garage floor, legs up like he was giving birth, and held a lighter to his ass. And that's when one of his drunk friends thought it'd be funny to spray alcohol on him mid-flame. His entire backside went up in flames. Instinctively, he started dragging his ass across the dirty garage floor like a dog with an itch. It put out the fire, but by the time he got to the hospital, his burns were covered in gravel and grime, making treatment a nightmare. I wasn't there, but I saw the pics. Second-degree burns, from what I remember. Poor bastard. One time, I was waiting in a lobby for a job interview. Some guy sat next to me and started bragging about how he just landed a new job he was completely unqualified for. He laughed about lying on his resume, faked his education, made up past experience, the works. Then, just casually, he mentioned he was about to hit a strip club to celebrate. Guess who I was supposed to interview that day? That same guy who was bragging in the lobby. The moment he walked in, it was obvious, completely unqualified. Couldn't even explain the 3-letter abbreviation in the job title he claimed to have 10 years of experience in. During the interview, I called the company he said he worked for, not the number on his resume, but the one we had in our records. They had never heard of him. He thought he had the job in the bag after making it through multiple interview rounds. Unfortunately for him, I had veto power. His offer was revoked immediately once we actually dug into his resume, which, for some reason, hadn't been checked properly before. If the guy had just kept his mouth shut and prepped even a little, he might have pulled it off long enough to collect a few paychecks. I had a lab partner in college who was studying to become a doctor. When he was pledging for a fraternity, they made him stay awake for an entire month, among other ridiculous hazing rituals. He ended up literally sleeping through all his classes and had to switch to a much easier major just to survive the initiation process. When I first started working as a pharmacist, I was at a CVS that gave out gift cards to patients who transferred their prescriptions to us. One of the employees was caught forging these gift cards and pocketing them. When confronted, she was told, "You'll be in less trouble if you just admit to what you did." She confessed. But instead of just gift card fraud, she also admitted to stealing prescription painkillers, lots of them. She was beyond screwed. My dad was known for being an asshole at work, always argumentative. When one of his colleagues suddenly died, a guy he had openly criticized, another professor jokingly suggested, "Maybe your dad had him taken out." The joke spread among faculty, then to students, and before long, the police were involved. Instead of just saying, "I had nothing to do with it, how can I help?" my dad refused to cooperate, acted like a complete jerk, and wasted everyone's time. In the end, they put him on leave for the rest of the year. And instead of using that time to reflect on how his behavior got him into this mess, he just sulked and complained that life was unfair. During the dot-com boom, our company's stock skyrocketed, and suddenly we were all millionaires on paper. The catch? The money only became real if we sold our stock options. But the price kept climbing, so selling today always felt like missing out on a bigger payday tomorrow. This mindset led to some truly awful decisions. One of my coworkers bought a massive house. Instead of cashing in his options to pay for it outright, which he easily could have, he put down a tiny down payment and took out a massive mortgage. Every month, he sold just enough stock options to cover his mortgage payment. Then the crash hit. Overnight, our stocks became worthless. He had no money left for his mortgage and lost the house. In 2008, I worked on a long-running shareholder lawsuit tied to, you guessed it, America Online. The main case had been settled ages ago, but these shareholders just couldn't let it go. We had to sift through mountains of old documents, emails, early PowerPoint slides, and company strategy reports. One particular presentation stuck with me for 15 years. It was from 1999, back when AOL was at its peak. The document analyzed up-and-coming internet search companies that were starting to gain traction, potential acquisitions. It reviewed all the major players, listing their strengths and weaknesses. Ever heard of Ask Jeeves? AltaVista? Excite? Lycos? They were all on there. And then there was the slide about Google. It described their use of a complex algorithm to return search results from a structured dataset they built by crawling the open web. The conclusion? Unlikely to become a major player in the search market. AOL could have bought Google for $5 to $10 million. They passed. I once had a boss who stole credit for everything my team did. We worked in event planning for major conferences. One day, we landed one of the biggest projects of my entire career. We spent months planning budgets, negotiations, contracts, the full package. My boss? He showed up to maybe 5 meetings the entire time. Then, during the event, a series of major screw-ups led to massive losses for the client. We managed to cover all the damages. But guess what? He took all the credit for the project, good and bad. I knew a girl who landed her dream job, a government research position. That same night, she went out to celebrate with friends at a bar. Unfortunately, she decided to drive home afterward. The cops pulled her over, and her blood alcohol level was just slightly over the legal limit. Spent a night in jail. Lost the job immediately. She was so humiliated that she moved away to Florida and cut ties with all her friends. I hope she's doing okay, but no one has heard from her since. My dad was a hothead who thrived on conflict. He was obsessed with his muscles, full-on steroid freak. But people weren't scared of his physique. They were terrified of his temper. He had guns at home, which were illegal in our country, making it a serious offense. And when he got into arguments, he had a nasty habit of running home, grabbing a weapon, and coming back just to scare the other person. Most people were intimidated enough to back off, so he rarely faced any consequences. Unfortunately for him, that streak ended when he picked a fight with the wrong guy. It all started because some guy parked across the street from our house. Not blocking our driveway, not breaking any rules, just parking legally on the opposite side of the road. My dad lost it, screaming at the guy to move his car because it was making it harder for him to park illegally. The guy refused. So my dad did what he always did, stormed inside, grabbed a gun, and came back out to threaten him. Only this time, instead of going home, the guy drove straight to the police station and reported him. Gave them our exact address. Less than an hour later, cops showed up at our house. They found 3 guns. My dad was arrested and spent the night in a holding cell. My grandfather had to bail him out. Otherwise, he would have been locked up for much longer. In our country, the prison system isn't great, but if it's your first offense, you usually get off relatively easily. But after that, you do not want to get a second conviction. Now my dad is scared of everything. Even the smallest road rage incident could land him in prison if the wrong person decides to call the cops.